Crowd roars as the iron gates slowly crack open. A condemned man, clad only in a loin-cloth, trembles visibly as he steps into the blinding sunlight of the Colosseum's arena. The sand beneath his feet, already stained rusty brown from previous spectacles, will soon drink more from the opposite end of the vast amphitheater. A different gate rises, and a hungry North African lion bounds forth, its eyes locking on the only prey available in the imperial box. The emperor raises his hand, then drops it decisively. The spectacle begins. This terrible scene happened thousands of times in Roman history. A famous poet named Juvenal said the people only wanted two things: bread and circuses. This meant Romans loved watching public executions as entertainment. It kept them happy and distracted from politics. For Romans, punishment was never just about justice. It was also entertainment woven into their daily lives. What we find horrible today, ancient Romans thought was their duty to watch and enjoy. The philosopher Seneca went to gladiator games even though he hated them. He said after watching, "I come home more greedy, more cruel, and more inhuman." But he still went, just like thousands of other Romans. They were drawn to this mix of justice, religious ritual, and bloody theater. Emperor Augustus created a system where certain days each year were set aside for public games that included executions. By the 4th century, there were over 135 days each year devoted to these entertainments. When the Colosseum opened, Emperor Titus held games for 100 straight days. Countless people were executed during this time. The schedule was carefully planned to keep the audience interested. Light entertainment happened in the morning, executions at midday, and gladiator fights in the afternoon. This created a full day of entertainment built around death. Perhaps no form of deadly entertainment captured Roman imagination more than damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This punishment was usually for slaves, prisoners of war, and the worst criminals. It turned execution into spectacular theater. The Colosseum, completed under Emperor Titus in 80 CE, was perfect for these deadly performances. It could hold 50,000 people and had elaborate underground systems to dramatically bring animals into the arena. Below the Colosseum floor was the Hypogeum, a 2-story underground network of tunnels and rooms. It had 32 animal pens and 80 vertical shafts. These allowed beasts and condemned prisoners to magically appear in the arena through trap doors. This created theatrical entrances that made the audience more excited. The historian Cassius Dio tells us that during the Colosseum's opening, 9,000 animals were killed alongside countless condemned criminals. These deaths were staged as elaborate hunts and executions. The executions were often set up as mythological stories. A criminal might be dressed as Icarus before being torn apart by bears, or as Hercules before facing a lion without weapons. Emperor Nero particularly loved these theatrical executions. He once forced a condemned man to act out the myth of Daedalus. According to historian Suetonius, the man was fitted with fake wings and ordered to fly from a great height. As expected, he fell to his death, splattering blood on the emperor's viewing box. In another case, Nero had a condemned man play Orpheus. He was sent into the arena with a lyre and told that his musical talents might calm the wild beasts. For a brief moment, it seemed the animals might actually be soothed. Then they tore him apart, creating a twisted version of the original myth where Orpheus charmed beasts with his music. The Roman writer Martial praised such spectacles in verse, saying, "What was mere fable when performed on stage becomes reality in our arena." The scale of these animal executions was huge. When Emperor Trajan celebrated his victories in 107 CE, he held games lasting 123 days. In these games, 11,000 animals were killed alongside thousands of condemned criminals and prisoners of war. Specialized hunters called venators traveled to the far reaches of the empire to capture exotic animals for these spectacles. They went from the dense forests of Germania to the deserts of Africa. A particularly elaborate execution under Emperor Probus featured an artificial hill planted with real trees in the center of the Circus Maximus. It was populated with 100 ostriches, 100 stags, 100 boars, and countless other animals that were released to be hunted by condemned criminals. They were promised freedom if they survived. Few did. Equally dramatic, but but perhaps more terrifying was vivicombustion, burning alive. This punishment had religious meaning for Romans, who believed fire purified the pollution of certain crimes. Vestal virgins who broke their vows of chastity faced this fate, as did arsonists in a form of poetic justice. But Emperor Nero elevated burning executions to macabre performance art during his persecution of Christians after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. In a gruesome innovation, Nero's executioners would sometimes coat victims in wax or pitch to make them burn more slowly and brightly. This extended their suffering while providing better illumination. Among the most famous victims was the Vestal Virgin Cornelia, executed in 91 AD under Emperor Domitian, despite her claims of innocence. Tacitus describes the scene of Nero's Christian executions. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as nightly illumination. These human torches illuminated Nero's gardens while he drove his chariot among them. The spectacle was so excessive that even many Romans, who were used to brutal punishments, felt pity for the victims, not because they thought the victims were innocent, but because they seemed to be dying to satisfy one man's cruelty rather than for the public good. This dual purpose of punishment and entertainment extended to Rome's military through fustuarium, clubbing to death. This punishment maintained discipline through theatrical brutality. It typically awaited soldiers who abandoned their posts, lost their weapons, or showed cowardice in battle. The condemned soldier would be led before his assembled comrades, who would stone and beat him with clubs until he died. The Roman military writer Vegetius noted that this punishment created such terror that facing the enemy in battle became less scary than the certainty of death at the hands of one's comrades. Polybius described the procedure. The tribune takes a cudgel and lightly touches the condemned man with it, whereupon all the soldiers fall upon him with clubs and stones and usually kill him in the camp itself. The public nature of this punishment was crucial. It served as a warning, forcing soldiers to witness what awaited those who failed in their duty. During the Second Punic War, when Rome faced Hannibal, the consul ordered fustuarium for an entire cohort of 4,000 men who had fled from battle. This was later changed to decimation, the execution of every 10th man. Perhaps most visually spectacular of all Roman execution methods was lapidatio, crushing by stones, or more extravagantly, by elephants. This method had particular meaning as it physically destroyed the condemned, leaving barely recognizable human remains. For crimes considered especially terrible, this total destruction of the body carried symbolic weight, denying the criminal proper burial and afterlife rites. While crushing under stones was more common due to practical constraints, elephant executions represented the height of exotic punishment as performance. After defeating Pyrrhus in the 3rd century BC, Romans acquired war elephants and discovered their usefulness not just in battle, but as instruments of execution. Deserters and prisoners of war might be paraded into the arena, then crushed beneath the feet of trained elephants as crowds cheered. The naturalist Pliny the Elder described how elephants could be trained to kill with precise cruelty. They can be taught to walk ropes, to throw missiles, and even to kill on command, crushing a man limb by limb as directed by their handler. This controlled destruction allowed executions to be prolonged for maximum entertainment value. Roman attitudes toward these spectacular punishments changed over centuries, reflecting broader social and political changes. Under the Republic, public executions emphasized the rule of law and consequences of breaking the social order. As Rome became an empire, emperors increasingly used these spectacles to show their power and win public favor, while displaying the terrible fate of those who challenged imperial authority. For Romans, betrayal was not merely a crime against individuals, but against Roman identity itself. Their punishments reflected this severity, designed not just to end lives, but to communicate powerful messages about loyalty, honor, and the consequences of treachery. The most infamous method was crucifixion, a punishment so brutal that Roman citizens were generally exempt from it. The condemned would be stripped, flogged mercilessly, and forced to carry the horizontal beam of their cross to the execution site. There they would be nailed or tied to the wood, and left to die slowly from exhaustion and suffocation, a process that could take days. Roman executioners developed techniques to prolong suffering, including using small seats on the cross that prevented victims from suffocating too quickly. Following Spartacus' slave rebellion in 71 BC, the Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus demonstrated the empire's response to betrayal on a massive scale. After defeating Spartacus' army, he ordered approximately 6,000 captured rebels crucified along the Appian Way from Rome to Capua. This 200-kilometer stretch of road became a gallery of human suffering, a warning to any who might consider challenging Rome's authority. While crucifixion targeted external enemies and lower classes, the Tarpeian Rock awaited Romans who betrayed their own. This execution site was a steep cliff on the Capitoline Hill, standing about 25 meters high. It overlooked the Roman Forum, the heart of civic life. The site became so associated with punishment for treason that the poet Juvenal would later reference it in his satires. The symbolism was deliberate. Traitors would be cast out from the very center of Roman society, their bodies broken on the rocks below where they might be denied proper burial. The historian Livy records that the first person executed at the rock was a consul accused of attempting to establish tyranny in 486 BC. For military units that failed in their duty, Rome devised decimation. When a legion showed cowardice or mutiny, they might face this collective punishment. Soldiers would be divided into groups of 10, and each group would draw lots. The unlucky soldier who drew the shortest lot would be beaten to death by his 9 comrades. The psychological impact was severe. It created a terrible lottery where every soldier had a 1 in 10 chance of death, generating fear across the entire unit. More insidiously, it forced soldiers to participate in executing their brothers in arms, making them complicit in the punishment. Perhaps most sophisticated was Damnatio Memoriae, condemnation of memory. For a culture that placed enormous value on remembrance and legacy, this punishment struck at something Romans feared more than death itself: oblivion. When the Senate decreed this punishment, it ordered the systematic erasure of the condemned from history. Statues would be destroyed, names chiseled from inscriptions, and even mentioning the person's name could become illegal. The practice became so common during politically unstable periods that sculptors reportedly developed techniques for creating statues with removable heads, anticipating that the subject might eventually fall from favor. Emperor Domitian's memory suffered this fate after his assassination in 96 CE. The Senate ordered his statues destroyed, his name scratched from public monuments, and his coins melted down. What makes this punishment particularly fascinating is its paradox. We know about these erased individuals precisely because the effort to remove them was so thorough that it became noteworthy. The very attempt to destroy memory preserved it in a different form. These punishments remind us that behind Rome's magnificent architecture and sophisticated legal system lay a willingness to employ spectacular violence against those who threatened its stability or betrayed its trust. They reveal not just Roman cruelty, but the eternal human struggle with power, justice, and memory.